Well, this is JC one more time. Now, I have a story now to tell. It's going to be quite unusual, and I know it's going to be sort of controversial with some of the folks who choose to listen to it. It has to do with God and who God is, and whether or not God has feelings, and how much we actually know about God. And He made man in His image, so that says some things, but I wonder about a God who can create the universe. Sometimes the decision that he makes in regards to ourselves and our loved ones. And that's what this is about. Somebody said, oh, don't ever get mad. God, he might zap you with lightning or something. Well, maybe or maybe not. But anyhow, this has to do with a personal thing that happened to me. And I'm gonna tell you the story about it, and you can take it or leave it and do with it as you wish. So without further ado, I'll go on now. I'll read this off. Um, it's called My Talks with God. This is a tribute to Rebecca. Rebecca's my daughter. And I'll read it off now. The preface. On the first day of January 2001, my daughter and first child, Rebecca Fae Alexander / LaPalme, went to heaven. She had been sick with cancer for over a year, and on that day, my angel, Rebecca, died. Sometime later, while I was working, driving my truck, this account of my 3 talks with God came into my mind. It wasn't something I consciously thought. It came to me from God, and when I got home that night, I wrote it down. And it goes like this: My Talks with God, a tribute to Rebecca. Today I was writing in my journal, and I began to think of the memories I have and how far back they go. And some of the things that I remember are so far back that my brother and sister say it must be something about which I've heard them speak. However, I've come up with some things that they had no idea that I could know. And it seems that the older I get, the farther back I can remember. For instance, now that I'm almost 65, and at the time I wrote this, I was almost 65, I can remember the first time I spoke to God. It was in the year of our Lord, 1935, in January. I would be born the next year, and God decided to make me aware of who and what I would be. I do not know what he looked like, and I can't remember his appearance very well, just that he had a big voice. He came over to me and said he wanted to make me aware of what life would be like and what kind of person I would be, so it wouldn't be a total shock when I arrived on earth and began my life. He told me to pay attention, and he began to tell me about myself after my birth. As he talked, my life was presented to me as if in a movie, and I was able to see myself and the things I would do after I was born. And as I grew up, I watched in wonder as different episodes of my existence unrolled before my eyes. I saw myself as a young boy, in and out of trouble most of the time, mostly quiet and alone. And as I grew older, the pattern of my life changed very little. I began to understand what I was about and how I would live as I proceeded through life. I would not, of course, remember this meeting with God after I came to be in my earthly form. However, I now realize why later, when something new happened to me, it seems as if it had happened before. Not many new things seem to be surprising to me. Places I visited for the first time were familiar to me, as if I had been there before, although I knew I hadn't. It was because before my birth, God had given me this glimpse of my future life on earth. He told me he does this for each person who's to be born. My life wasn't special. I amounted to very little as I grew older. I spent much of my time in and out of trouble. Materially, I had very little. I stole what I wanted with no remorse. I came and went as I pleased, and although there was family who tried to look after me, I did what I wished, for right or for wrong. Finally, at age 17, I was brought before a probation officer who had known me professionally for many years. I was told I would be sent to prison for whatever my misdeed at that time had been. I don't remember what it was now. He was through dealing with me, he said, and giving me more chances. Enough was enough. I was terrified, and I asked for one last deal with him. If he would not send me to prison, I would enlist in the United States Army. He agreed, and I enlisted for 3 years. Then God said that was the end of the talk, that I would have to wait to be born to see the rest, the really important things that would happen to me. He asked me if I noticed anything odd or unusual about what I saw. After pondering for a time what I had seen, I said I'd seen most of what would later be different aspects of my life, different emotions and feelings, love, hate, desire, jealousy, and lust. I noted I hadn't been a cruel person and had never intentionally done anything to harm anyone or anything, but also hadn't been very thoughtful toward others. I'd lived within myself and for myself for the most part, and rarely, if ever, considered anyone else, either for good or for bad. I'd been bad much of the time, and bad things had happened to me as a result. Then a light came on in my mind, and it dawned on me what was missing. It was, quote, good, 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 end quote. I'd done very little that was good for anyone, including myself, and not much good had happened to me. There was an abundance of bad in my life and very little good. I saw a look in the eyes of God that told me I had noticed the main reason for this lesson I was getting from Him. I asked Him what I could do to change my life so it would have more good in it. He said there was nothing I could do. I asked Him if I could make it through life without good, and He said no, I couldn't, but not to worry because someday I would have all the good I could ever want. I asked Him to tell me how I would know when that happened, and He said no, he wouldn't tell me. He said that when it happened, I would know. Then He told me we would talk again, and He was gone. I was born the next year. Although I didn't remember the lesson from God, my life progressed as it had been told to me it would. I was the person I was fated to be and lived just as I was supposed to, according to God's preview of me. Of course, never having been really happy, I wasn't aware that I wasn't happy. I just lived from day to day, and that was enough for me. Then I went into the Army and began my service to my country. Much of it was just doing as I was told and trying to stay out of trouble. I tried to get overseas duty, but I couldn't. So after basic training in California, I spent the rest of my tour of duty at Fort Bliss, Texas. While I was there, a girl I had known in Odessa, Texas, came to Fort Bliss, and after a day or two, she and I married. Our life was uneventful for a time, with nothing outstanding happening to us. Then on August 14th, 1956, something happened that would change my life forever. Sometime during that day, a nurse at William Beaumont Army Hospital in Fort Bliss, Texas, handed me a small bundle. I took the bundle into my arms, very careful to hold it just right. My heart pounded and I felt weak and anxious. I moved the edge of the blanket that surrounded the tiny bundle, and I gazed upon the most beautiful sight my eyes had ever beheld. I could not speak. I could hardly breathe. The tiny face that peered back at me was so radiant, I was dumbstruck. She was such a lovely vision. I could not begin to describe the feeling I got by just holding and looking at her. Looking at her and holding her made my heart soar to heaven. Then from my total existence, I heard the voice of God for the second time. He said, "James, as I promised you, here for you is a lifetime of pure goodness. Love and cherish this child, and you will know goodness forever. She is Rebecca." Well, I loved her and I watched her grow, and she was always kind and considerate, compassionate and good. As a reward to her, God had made her good for everyone who met her. She always had a ready smile, and she had enough smiles so she could give at least one, sometimes two, to everyone she met. She always had enough goodness to go around, and she made everyone she met happy. For whatever reason, Rebecca and I parted for a time. I saw her occasionally, and I accepted her love and her smile. She married and had children of her own. Her life was an inspiration to everyone who knew her. She was a wonderful wife to her husband and a loving mother to her children. Sometime later, Rebecca and I had a private talk. She had questions for me about things that she couldn't understand. I answered her questions. We cried together, and she said she finally understood what had bothered her. She told me she loved me, and I told her I had always loved her. We became closer than we ever had been. I was with her at every opportunity. Don and I planned every vacation we could to be with her. She was a joy and a blessing. She was all the good I could ever want. And one day Rebecca was attacked by a vicious disease. There was no reason for it. It was a mistake. But the demon disease didn't care that it had the wrong person. This could not be happening to Rebecca, but it was. She began treatment to defeat the disease, and for a while it seemed she would win her battle. At one point, there was no trace of the demon left, and Rebecca was filled with joy. And we all thank God for delivering her from the fate that she had faced. It was wonderful. Then something happened. No one knew why, but the disease returned with a vengeance. This time there was no reprieve. Rebecca suffered for over a year. Then, when there was no hope left except for the miracle that she and I had prayed for, she left the hospital at Denver and she went home to Colorado Springs, Colorado. I called her several times every day and we talked briefly. She gave me a kiss and she told me she loved me. I returned her kiss and I said I loved her. Then one day I called her and she could hardly talk. She gave me one last kiss and I told her I loved her, and we agreed to meet in heaven. Later on that day, she died. That night, Donna and I cried for Rebecca. We were sad for Rebecca and the life she didn't get to finish. How could this terrible thing happen to someone as perfect, as loving, as caring and compassionate, as good as Rebecca? There was no good reason for it. It made no sense that death could take someone who deserved to live many more years. The world would be worse off now. Everyone would grieve for her and suffer her loss. Mostly she would be cheated out of the rest of her life. It was wrong. I told God so. I railed at him, and I asked him why he had let this happen. I told him of the many hundreds of people who had prayed for his help and mercy for Rebecca. I asked where was the merciful God who could have performed the miracle we prayed for. I told him he was wrong and unmerciful and could not be counted upon. God listened for a time. Then he spoke to me for the third time. He said, James, I know you're sad, and I don't blame you. But I had a good reason for taking Rebecca to heaven. The world has been getting more wicked for many years. More and more people are leaving me and following the devil. The angels and my son and I have had to give more and more goodness to everyone, the older people, the younger people, even the newborns, even before they're born. It is such a chore that sometimes I lose track of what's going on around me, or I seem to for an instant. In heaven, we had given out so much goodness that things were beginning to change. Heaven is only as big as the goodness that is there. One day a while back, I noticed heaven seemed to be getting smaller. After checking things over, I realized we were having to give out so much goodness that we were using up heaven itself. I spoke to my son and the angels, and we decided that to save heaven for all eternity, we had to replace the goodness we had given out for the last 1,000,000 years. Then we began the search for that amount of goodness, and the only place we found enough goodness to last for all eternity was in a precious child named Rebecca. So, James, you can see why I had to take Rebecca to her heavenly home sooner than I wanted to. It was to save heaven for all eternity. Now that danger is gone forever. As you can see, I couldn't argue with the reasoning of God. I understood why he decided to do what he did. I know that no one else on earth could do what Rebecca has done in saving heaven. Still, I love and I miss her very much. We all do. I guess we'll see her again in heaven. This is JC. Thank you very much.